Well, happy day 4 of ISE. Thanks for coming to the main stage. I'm Brad Grimes. I'm with AVIXA, the Audiovisual and Integrated Experience Association. I'm joined this morning by Sean Wargo, our Senior Director of Market Intelligence. We've almost completed a full week surrounded by the lion's share of the global audiovisual industry. So Friday morning seems like a good time to take the temperature of the industry, talk about what it looks like in the coming years. Sean spent a lot of time this week at several of the conferences here, sharing market research of AVIXA with those audiences, and I figured this is a good time to, in a casual environment, talk a little bit about those findings and give us some ideas of how our businesses are going to run in the years ahead. So, welcome, Sean.
Sounds good. Thanks, Brad.
I was a former journalist. I don't want to bury the lead, so let's get right to it.
Sounds great.
So what is the forecast currently as you see it for the ProAV industry?
So we've done a lot of presentations this week to talk about several key themes in the industry. I think the big top line that we want to talk about is just how great the diversity of opportunity is in our space. So as you look at this slide, and actually there's some visuals printed on the seats around you, I would encourage you to pick up two things. One is just a brochure about the intelligence we have. The other is this infographic and some more information about what's driving the industry. So the big thing we've been saying is obviously a big industry. So $186 billion in 2018, expected to grow at about 4% through 2023, reaching 229 billion by that point. Underneath that, there's a lot of story we can talk about, certainly many trends that we're seeing here, all of that kind of backed up by a strong GDP as we look across the globe. That's really been the theme we've talked about.
But it's continually growing. I mean, it's a growing industry. It's not like we've hit any breaks or anything, or it doesn't feel like it here in these halls.
Yeah, certainly not. I mean, I think the big question for us is things like recession. Those who follow economies globally, whether it's US, UK, especially with Brexit and other things going on across the globe, there's always that question, are we headed for some sort of slowdown in the future? I think we've got that pretty well baked in because of so much that's going on in the industry that keeps us, as economists say, robust against that recession. But yeah, certainly a growth trend as we look forward.
Now these are what we would call these headwinds that could affect us. Is this industry, being a technology industry based on innovation, is it somehow less impacted by these types of macroeconomic factors? Is it more? What's the likely impact of things like Brexit or global slowdown or GDP slowdowns on the ProAV industry?
Yeah, certainly it's hard to not feel some impact, especially if your business, let's say you're an integrator who's serving corporate clients. All of us have those periods where we're serving clients who are hit by the recession. Their consumers, the ultimate consumers, are spending less. I'd say, though, the biggest thing ultimately that impacts us right now is things like low unemployment. So as a global phenomenon across so many different economies, we have very low rates of unemployment. Hard to, at this point they're saying essentially everybody's employed. That hits our industry hard because we're trying to find capable resources to do the projects. So those kinds of things certainly impact us, as do slowdowns, but nice thing is there's so many vertical markets. In any recessionary period, you've got some parts of the economy that shrink, some that are actually pretty stable. We serve almost every part of the economy, so I think that helps us.
Yeah, I was going to ask you next is so we're enjoying growth, the industry continues to innovate, grow, new opportunities. Then there are these factors that are outside of our control, but what can an AV company, whether it's an integrator, a design firm, a manufacturer, sort of do to prepare themselves for things that we don't quite have our hands on yet?
Yeah, I think a trade show like this is a great place to do several things. One is learn about new products, new solutions that your business could be potentially expanding into. So as in dealing with a shortage of capable resources out there, you start to change your profile of who you're looking for. Well, a business does that too in terms of changing its capabilities to try to meet some of the diverse needs of a marketplace. So that could be, let's say you're a traditional AV provider who has typically done hanging of displays, installation of audio, Increasingly, all that's served by back-end IP systems, so it's getting facility and capability around IP, expanding your capabilities there. It's also making connections at trade shows, networking out into new vertical markets.
Yeah.
As we talked about, corporate, if you're a corporate provider, maybe you start looking at hospitality or retail or transportation as an example. Lots of growth happening in some of those areas too.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about that. So if you've been specializing in certain markets right now, clearly AV is, we're starting to see, your research tells us, pick up in a lot of different vertical markets. I mean, there are certain vertical markets growing faster than others, and clearly at times of uncertainty, diversification, I would think makes a lot of sense. What types of markets are growing more than others, and where should people be looking?
Sure, so I just pulled up a slide actually that we've been referencing this week about 6 of the vertical markets that we really wanted to focus on as part of our research and industry awareness efforts in 2018, going into 2019. These 6 are, some of them are key and fundamental to ProAV. So a lot of integrator installers, manufacturers had historically focused on corporate and education as 2 important markets. But if you look in the lower left-hand corner of these graphics, each one of them, there is a compound annual growth rate number. Corporate is one that is a large sector, but growing at a slower rate than some of the others. We focus on something like transportation hubs where there's a tremendous amount of spending on digital signage, wayfinding, networks, all sorts of things. That's growing at a faster than average rate for our industry and presenting tremendous opportunity as we go forward. In fact, I would venture to say that at $9.5 billion, we're probably even undercounting to some extent that the true opportunity there. Another big one that we don't have up here, healthcare. There's a lot of talk. We're always, of course, getting sick, need to go to the doctors. Healthcare is a growing industry globally. That's one that's a fast grower for us too, and is a challenge certainly to get into, but is another one to look at.
Yeah. You mentioned digital signage. Hall 8, where this main stage is located, has a lot of the digital signage that the show is in here. You identified that as a sort of an application area that's growing. Can you talk a little bit more about that application area and other applications that are showing? So you can go into vertical markets, or you can spread out horizontally into new solution sets. Where are the solution sets that are growing?
Yeah, great question. I'd say, let me see if I can pull back a slide up. So this one is about digital signage and the diverse opportunity that's underneath it. So one of the things we've been talking about as an industry association over the last several years, even precipitated our rebrand to some extent to that integrated experience, is a focus away from just core technology, more towards solutions like a digital signage, like conferencing collaboration, like presentation types of auditoriums, all that sort of thing, learning systems, etc. All of the fundamental ingredients for solutions are still technologies, like digital signage, where we have a significant amount of displays, service component, etc. That's what allows a company, an integrator, to piece together so much of their core capability into new areas as well. They become capable in one, they start to branch out into several others. So digital signage is one of the largest. Conferencing collaboration is perhaps getting the most buzz and is the biggest chunk currently of ProAV, but digital signage is on the rise. We're also seeing a return to large venue presentation systems in the form of cinema, home theater, etc. All that's a growth area as well for us.
You talked about conferencing and collaboration. Can you talk a little bit about how that area has evolved? How the needs of the customers have evolved, how the technology has evolved to sort of change that solution set?
Conferencing collaboration, like so many others, and I think you're seeing it on this slide too, if you can read that lower pink corner where it says streaming media storage and distribution. Essentially what that is at its core is an IT type of technology, backends. So these are systems that provide the content to feed all of the systems that we have. In digital signage, it's displays. In conferencing collaboration, it's all the software and services that enable conferencing collaboration to happen. So we've seen this real shift from what was very hardware-driven solutions, audio conferencing devices that sat on desktops or even cameras, etc., shifting more and more to a service component. a subscription component. So we've seen the marketplace need to adjust its skill sets, its product offerings, to account for an increasingly service or cloud-based offering. That's been a challenge for a hardware-based industry, but one that I think presents some interesting opportunities for add-on investment, remote monitoring, managed services, all of that kind of product and capability as well.
All right, and I want to take that opportunity to I'll jump back to some other questions I had, but I want to, you sort of introduced it, I want to jump ahead to the opportunity to talk about the makeup of audiovisual integration firms. With a lot of this IP and IT-based integration, how have we seen, or you've seen, integration firms sort of evolve, the talent that they're seeking, the certifications they're seeking, the individuals that they're trying to bring into their ecosystems?
One of the things we hear at ISE and Infocom in the United States, if you ask integrators who are coming to the training programs, one of the common things they'll talk about is a need to get familiar with IP. So there's a number of education tracks that allow them to get the fundamentals so that they can as well handle some of that back-end architecture and don't have to worry about whether or not the networks are optimized for AV distribution. As we know, there's significant demands, significant needs for bandwidth in order to distribute 4K, 8K, high-resolution content throughout many different displays. So I would say integrators are starting to look to either retrain some of the existing resources to become more capable in some of these areas, hire new. So we're seeing within the composition of the workforce and the jobs that are being added into integration firms start to take on a distinctly different flavor. They start to sound a little bit more IT-based, less traditional AV. So we have in the United States something called an AV equipment technician that's categorized by occupation code. That's a standard for our industry. Oftentimes those individuals are hired. Increasingly we see computer user support specialists being hired in as well. And to me that highlights this changing flavor of the types of technologies and skills that we have to have in integration.
Yeah. Okay, so I jumped ahead, I'll jump back again.
Sounds good. Lightning
round. Let's talk about some of the verticals a little bit more, the places where our solutions need to go in. I know you've done a lot of research around things like retail and transportation you mentioned. Let's start with retail. Again, we're in a digital signage hall here. How has retail evolved, and how does that reflect the opportunity there for audiovisual and manufacturers and integrators?
Yes, I have a slide. Let's see if I can pull this up.
I didn't even know we had a slide. I swear to God, I don't know that they're there.
Basically, one of the things that we've tried to do in our research is tie back to the ultimate consumer journey that's going through in a particular vertical market. In order to develop a good solution set in a design thinking way, one of the things we're advised to do in that kind of discipline or approach is walk a mile in the customer's shoes. So we focused our research on what are the key points, the key leverage points within each vertical. Let's take retail, as you mentioned. It kind of goes without saying, or we sort of intuitively know as shoppers ourselves, that the primary point of the journey is I have to be able to find what I'm looking for. I'm interested in a product selection. I need to have an easy checkout. Our research confirmed that if you impact those things in solutions that you bring to the marketplace, then you're fundamentally impacting the consumer satisfaction with that engagement. So I think that's the key in engaging these new vertical markets. If you're familiar with one, to become familiar with another, is start to really understand those fundamentals of what drives the customer that then forces or encourages investment by the end user decision maker into solutions that solve it. We tend to think technology. In a lot of cases, that's where we come from, but it is important to tie that back, and that's what we try to explore with the research.
So wait a minute. On the retail front, there's this apocalypse going on. I got 3 notices while I was here in Amsterdam about packages that just arrived at my house back in the States. I bought them all online. In fact, I probably bought at least one of them while I was here. In retail, we know, because we're spending a lot of time talking to retailers, they've been dealing with this retail apocalypse where malls are shutting down. It's not this is largely a North American phenomenon, but it's happening in a lot of places. What are retailers going to do about that? I mean, what is the play? Is there an opportunity to draw shoppers back into the stores? Do they want to go back into the stores? How does that impact your forecast for the retail market in ProAV?
A favorite topic of mine. Did a lot of work in retail in the past. There, without a doubt, the shift or the emergence of online shopping and e-commerce has been disruptive. There's no question about that. We've seen a tremendous amount of shift to online shopping. At the same time, in order to differentiate itself, retail has had to evolve. And so what we're seeing in the marketplace today is brick and mortar retail reimagining itself. Not all companies are able to do that quickly or fast enough to adopt, or are still sort of caught in old business models. And so without a doubt, the road is becoming littered with casualties of familiar retailers who are downsizing as a result. But at the same time, as you walk around in malls in the United States or stores across the world, one thing you're starting to see is this focus on destination retail, making stores a place that consumers want to visit to experience a brand. So it comes back to that brand identity, wanting to communicate it. An example of this in the United States is Dyson, a vacuum manufacturer, who some of us have heard of as really trying to differentiate itself from the lion's share of the market, has created a real destination type of retail, lots of AV displays, audio, lighting, etc. Very cool conceptual store. Consumers come in because they want to test the product, see it, get a feel for the Dyson brand. That sort of thing is becoming, I think, more commonplace across a lot of the premier brands where they need that touch point. So certainly, yes, stores, we overinvested, that's pulling back, but I think we're starting to see a reinvestment in fewer locations, but a heightened experience.
It's almost like embracing that there was a time when a lot of retailers resented people coming in with their phones and window shopping and going and then going home and ordering it from an online thing. Some of them are embracing it. You mentioned Dyson.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I met a store designer for Sleep Number who's embraced the idea of, okay, bring them in, give them an audio-visual experience, let them lie in your bed and figure out how it contours to their body and things like that. And then sure, then go home and make the sale. They still made the sale, so it's definitely something like that.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about hospitality quickly because that's sort of related. What's the hospitality market looking like and how are they approaching AV solutions?
Yeah, as this slide talks about, there is still a focus, of course, on that in-room experience. That's at the core of that hospitality is still what's it like from within my room? Can I get the content I want? There's experimentation, of course, with voice and other sorts of control systems to some degree, and we have some data that suggests that may have been an initial investment that's sort of on hold for the moment to see how that plays itself out. Is it reliable? Is it sustainable? Is it scalable out to the rest of the rooms inside of a property? But I think we're also starting to see, consistent with many other verticals, is an investment in the brand image. So we talked about this in retail. In hospitality, it's very similar, where technology is becoming a part of the brand statement for a hotel or a resort property. It comes in the form of digital signage in lobbies and in common areas, food and beverage areas, dining, etc. Lots of displays, audio, and lighting solutions coming in there, ultimately to enhance it. Some great pictures if you kind of go out there. We shared some of those yesterday at the Hospitality Summit over at the Okura. This idea of exceptional experience in the form of a guest experience in this case, and using technology not necessarily as the end game, but as an ingredient to try to enhance and augment and improve upon that experience. Consistent across all these verticals, really.
Yeah. And then I want to talk about education. Because the higher education market is almost part of this industry. I mean, this industry is largely born out of higher education needs for audiovisual solutions decades and decades ago. But that industry's got to be flipped on its head now because we've got digitally native students coming in and with expectations that were never there before. How's that market responding to their ultimate end users, which is the students, and what types of technologies are they adopting to meet those needs?
We're going through a period, and it's probably different throughout the globe in terms of the scale of this. Certainly in North America, we have a ton of higher ed institutions. as we both know, with kids now in
college.
college and trying to pay for that experience. But I think what you're seeing is a reinvestment in several fronts. One is the classroom experience, certainly. Going back a little bit, there was an investment in interactive whiteboards. We're starting to see that pull back a little bit as that's deployed now. Much more investment in even something that's perhaps more traditional, improved audio for being able to communicate with the classroom, improved video. Not just one, but multiple screens. So reinvestment perhaps in the primary display in a large screen or a large classroom format. There's talk of laser projections starting to come into some of the larger rooms. But additional screens for displaying additional information and provide a more interactive and engaging environment. At the same time, diverse or distributed learning has become a big phenomenon. So those of you who haven't seen yet, there's a few companies. Wargo is one example of solutions to enable or facilitate that distance learning experience.
Yeah.
Really cool stuff. Very Star Trek in some ways, of like a flagship room, a broadcast room where as a professor I can be in a smaller footprint, see all of my students on the screen, push polls to them, communicate with them, enable collaboration, do a test, all sorts of cool stuff from remote. So I think it's an interesting time for university, and you're starting to see increasing amounts of investment. Great thing about education too is you've already got an embedded technologist in a lot of cases who's also trying to talk and advocate for this. So that really helps integrators who are trying to bring some of that new solution to light in those markets.
I lied. I do want to ask about one more vertical market, which is the corporate market. Because it's such a significant market for this industry and a lot of investment is done there, how has that evolved? I noticed that the growth there is modest in the coming years. But how is a corporate space? You know, there was a time when remote workers were what everybody wanted. Everybody, was pushed out of the office and they could work anywhere, and they still can, thank you to technology. But is the corporate space evolving beyond that, and what does it look like, and how is AV involved in it?
It's been an interesting story in corporate because I think there's two forces acting simultaneously. On the one hand, similar to what we're talking about in retail or in hospitality, there's a desire by many corporations to utilize technology as a brand expression. So some of that is an effort to try to bring back employees. While we do still have remote work, that's obviously a phenomenon that's here to stay. It makes sense, especially in an environment where we have low unemployment. It's hard to find good talent. So you need to be flexible. You've got to be able to have workers across the globe, not even just within a region. So at the same time that they're trying to invest in conferencing, collaboration, distance connection, all that sort of stuff, you're seeing this investment on the headquarters to make a compelling place to work. It's somewhat brand, it's somewhat employee satisfaction, it's retain or attract and retain, that types of story. So it's about how the individual office spaces are designed. It's how we have huddle spaces to be able to collaborate with each other, privacy spaces so that we can collaborate but not disrupt our fellow coworkers. Still, the lodge, auditorium, boardroom types of places, environments are needed for the big meetings. So a diverse opportunity, which is why a lot of our integrators are really saying, you know what, while there are these other verticals to go after, honestly, corporate is still a great place for me to work. I'm still getting plenty of business. I think, returning to one of our previous notes, the important thing though is, are you diverse? Are you making sure that you're pulling from a lot of different verticals or a lot of different client types to make sure, if there is downturn, that you've got a little protection from that.
That's great.
Yeah.
One last question, because I got tweeted at, by a lot of friends, your take on the voice control part of this market. I talk to myself, which is what it looks like when I walk through the kitchen, but I'm talking to devices throughout the house. What application is there for the commercial space, and will it be something that actually takes off in ProAV?
It's been a popular question for us across the shows. When you talk to attendees at any trade show or you're at sessions like this, they ask that same question. Is voice ready for prime time? Are we starting to see it in the boardroom? As we just noted, we've seen experiments with that in hospitality. Clearly, it's happening as experiments inside of corporate as well. Privacy, security, those concerns have been raised as a key objection, maybe more challenge for the technology. I pulled up a slide that kind of shows what technologies different vertical markets are actually planning to decrease their investment over the next few years. I didn't highlight it, but if you scan each one of these boxes, you're going to see voice assisted control as an area of planned decrease of investment. Does that mean voice is dead? Absolutely not. I think what that's telling us is experiments are running. Companies have made their investments on small scale. They're letting that play out. They want to see how this develops, how they can integrate it and work with it so that maybe there is more future for it in the future. Certainly is a part of how we interact and will be for the future, but I think we're starting to see a little bit of a downplay for the moment as it further develops and stabilizes.
Well, thanks. We've got all zeros on our clock here. Sean, thank you for your time. Appreciate
Thanks,
it this
Brad.
morning. Thank you for coming, everybody. Enjoy the last afternoon of your time here at ISE. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much.